Panther-Lair Show here for the week. We're on the live stream on YouTube, of course, on Tuesday nights at 8:30 p.m. If you listen to the podcast through the week, you want to get involved in the podcast, you want to participate in the podcast, make comments, ask questions, just generally get more in the conversation, you can, of course, join us on Tuesday nights at 8:30, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you subscribe to Panther-Lair.com on YouTube, on the YouTube channel there, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you can get notifications, when we're going live. We've actually been doing some post-game shows the last couple weeks. We did it after the Boston College game, did it after this Miami game the last week, and we kind of plan those in advance and sort of set a time for when we're going to start, but it's a little bit up in the air, and we might run behind by a few minutes. Well, if you subscribe to Panther-Lair.com on YouTube, and this isn't a subscription to Panther-Lair.com. This is, to our YouTube channel. You subscribe at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You get a notification when we're about to start. And so you can it pops up on your phone, you hit the button, and there you are. You're right in the live stream, right in the chat, ready to comment and have comments and questions and interactions and discussions about Pitt football. We had a lot of fun actually doing it. It was after losses, so it wasn't the ideal situation, but I feel like I think it was good to have those conversations after the game the last 2 weeks and really just talk about what we saw. I talk about what I saw, you talk about what you saw, and we just, kind of go back and forth about it. I thought it was good to do that. I think people enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed it. I don't know if it was cathartic or anything like that. I'm not going to pretend like it was. Because you're not going to wash away the stink of 3 losses in a row just because you sit around with some people on a YouTube live stream and talk about it. But I think it was fun to do. You know what I mean? I think it was fun to get together and kind of share some thoughts and share some ideas. So we're going to do that again this week. Pitt, of course, hosting Notre Dame at Heinz Field. It's a 3:30 kickoff. My thought is that I'll get back from the stadium and get ready to go live maybe around 9 o'clock. So tentatively, kind of set aside around between 9 and 9:30. I'm thinking we'll get started with a post-game chat here on the youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So mark your calendars for that. Or like I said, click subscribe to the YouTube channel, to the Panther-Lair.com YouTube channel. The website is youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Click subscribe, and then you'll get a notification whenever we're about to go live. So that's the easiest way for you to do it, and make sure you don't miss anything that we do here on the Panther-Lair.com YouTube channel. If you're on the live stream right now tonight, we appreciate that. Welcome everyone in. I'm glad you could make it to chime in and join our conversation here. And make sure while you are here, you click subscribe to the channel. That's what I meant to say. I got distracted a little bit. YouTube shows me so many different things while the live stream is going on that I get distracted sometimes looking at all the different bells and whistles they have happening. But already got some comments coming in. People are already chiming in. We have the option, if you are on the live stream, you can be a super chatter. And to do the super chat, you click the button down at the bottom. And it gives you an opportunity to highlight your comment, highlight your question so we can see it. You can support the podcast, and we can make sure we see your comment and your question. We can interact and make sure we get to it. Because it kind of occurred to me that I noticed that I don't always get to all the comments and questions that people post out there. And I apologize for that. I'm trying to get to everyone, but we sometimes run out of time and that kind of thing. If you use the super chat function, we will definitely get to your comments. I can guarantee you that. So you can definitely highlight it. RJ Seaman 38, regular listener of the podcast, viewer of the live stream, already throwing a little bit of super chat money out there. So we appreciate that. But anybody who wants to support the podcast, we appreciate it through the super chat function. We will definitely get to your comments. Obviously, first of all, everybody get a beer. You have something cold in your hands. This is Bard's beer. It's a sorghum malt beer, gluten-free, because that's how we do it these days. It's a good beer. Water, sorghum, hops, and yeast. It's good. It's not quite. It's not what Arx is producing out there in Emsworth. We like the local guys a lot, but this is good. I need to restock at Arx. In the meantime, I'll drink the Bards and enjoy it pretty well. Obviously there's a lot to talk about with Pitt football right now. The team is 3-3. They're in the midst of a 3-game losing streak and staring down a stretch of schedule that's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I mean, this is we all talked about it before the season started about how the schedule got more difficult, got more challenging with the change. When they went from the 8-game conference schedule to the 10-game conference schedule, when they added road game against Clemson to Pitt's schedule, when they added, they added Louisville, although that didn't turn out to be as challenging as we expected. They added NC State, which we didn't think would be all that challenging, and it turned out to be more challenging than expected. Same with Boston College. But overall, I think when we compared the previous 2020 schedule to what Pitt ended up with in 2020, we said, wow, this is a more difficult schedule. This is a more challenging schedule than what they had. And they're really hitting the meat of it now. I mean, Boston College and NC State, in Syracuse were supposed to be sort of warm-ups, with Louisville and Miami being the real challenges out of the first, 5 ACC games before you really dive into, your Notre Dame and, later on Virginia Tech and obviously the game at Clemson. Our perceptions of certain teams have changed. Florida State, who the heck knows what they are? I mean, they looked like pushovers. Now they're looking a little more stout and maybe a little more challenging than we previously expected. Georgia Tech looks better than we thought. Obviously, Boston College and NC State look better than we imagined. I think NC State looks like one of the better teams in the ACC right now, which is not what I expected prior to the season. I don't think it's what a lot of people expected prior to the season. But they're really heading into the challenging portion of the schedule. And for a team that's coming off a 3-game losing streak, those are kind of terrifying words. You just lost 3 in a row and you're about to hit the tough part of the schedule. Seems to me you were already in the tough part of the schedule. But now they got Notre Dame coming to town this week. Undefeated top 5 team as Notre Dame is wont to be. And this is a big challenge. And look, we can always talk about how, well, Pitt always seems to play Notre Dame close. And it's true. You get a lot of close games against Notre Dame over the years. 2018, they're coming off the win over Syracuse, which was an overtime game at home. But prior to that game, they had gotten their doors blown off by UCF, got beat up real bad not beat up real bad, but it took a pretty demoralizing loss against North Carolina. And they beat Syracuse, but then they go on the road. They go to Notre Dame, top 5 team in the country, and they take them down to the wire. They give Notre Dame everything they can handle. Prior to that, 2015, not as close of a game. I think the score ended up being relatively close, maybe inside of 2 scores. I forget exactly what it was, but it wasn't that close of a game. There was this stretch at the end of the 2015 season where Pitt really struggled to score in the first half. Notre Dame was one of those games. Miami was one of those games. I think North Carolina was one of those games where they had like 3, had a field goal in the first half of each of those games. And that was the case against Notre Dame. So they scored some points in the second half. I think Jordan Whitehead made his offensive debut in that game, scored 2 touchdowns. It might not have been his debut, but he scored a couple rushing touchdowns in that game. And they ended up making it closer. But that was really a Notre Dame game that wasn't all that close. But then you go back before that, 2013 was the year they beat, I don't know if it was an upset or not. I guess you would consider it an upset when Pitt beats Notre Dame. Here at Heinz Field, Ray Vinipal had an interception or 2, big play Ray. That was a good game for Pitt. 2012, they go out to Notre Dame. That's the one with triple overtime where they lose with the 2 number 2s and Harper misses a field goal at the end of regulation and all that kind of stuff. 2011, Notre Dame came to Heinz Field. They played them like 6 years in a row, 2008, 2009, 2010, 11, 12, and 13. And then again in 2015, so they put them 7 out of 8 years. But 2011, the Todd Graham year, that game was at Heinz Field, and it was a close game. It was an ugly. What was the final of that? 12-7 or something like that. It was not a high scoring affair. It was not a pretty game, but it was close. Pitt played them close. 2010, Pitt goes out to Notre Dame and they lost, and it was not a very good loss, but it was not a blowout by any stretch of the imagination. 2009, they host Notre Dame. It was really their last win of the season, because after that, of the regular season at least, they beat Notre Dame, to move into the top 12 or top 10, I think, and then they lose to West Virginia and Cincinnati to finish out the regular season. And of course, 2008, they go out to South Bend and win in 4 overtimes. Before that, I think it was 2005 and 2004 games. In 2003, they've played Notre Dame a lot, and they've often played them close, and they've gotten wins probably more often than you would expect them to. So that's a storyline heading into this game. it doesn't bear a lot of relevance on how this game will go, other than just, hey, isn't that weird? Pitt often plays Notre Dame really close. More relevant, more specific to this game is kind of how these matchups are going to go and how this team is going to bounce back from a 3-game losing streak and how this team is going to overcome the issues that has dogged them through the last 3 games, through their 3-game losing streak, how it's going to overcome those issues and not let those issues sink their chances and lead to another loss. Because here's the thing that I keep thinking about with the Miami game. It ends up being, 31-19. It ends up being a 12-point loss. But it wasn't a blowout. 12 points is not going to be a blowout anyway. It felt like Miami was in control for most of the game because, they were ahead for most of the game. They had the advantage on the scoreboard, and so it felt like Miami controlled the game. But Pitt was never really that far out of the game, and Pitt was never really that far away from Miami. When you look at 5 red zone trips, and they only get 1 touchdown out of it, and they get 4 field goals on the other 4 trips, that's how close they were. You score touchdowns on a couple of those drives, and things look a little different. You're much closer than maybe the final score would indicate. It was very much a winnable game. These are the kinds of, I guess you would say, rationalizations that you offer after a game like that. They were really that close. And you can go to the Boston College game and say the same thing. Well, they were really close. You know what I mean? They didn't get blown out of the water in any of these 3 losses. They very much had the wins in their hands, or at least the opportunity to win was presented to them. They just failed to capitalize. They failed to come through, but they were very close. And that's sound football logic. It's the kind of things that you say about teams. It's the kind of things you say after teams lose. There are games when you lose and you clearly weren't in the game. You're clearly not on the same level as those teams. And we've seen Pitt play those games. I think last year, the Penn State game, it was a winnable game. That's not even a good example. I'm not sure if there's really a good example from last year. 2018, they certainly, they weren't on the same level as Clemson. They weren't on the same level as UCF. They didn't really feel all that close to Miami, quite frankly, in that game that they lost. Obviously, Penn State is a 51-6 loss. They don't seem like they're on the same level as those teams that season. 2017 had plenty of those as well. Oklahoma State was a bloodbath. Georgia Tech wasn't pretty. Despite Georgia, although that would be one where you look at it and you say, well, the teams weren't really separated by that much. Georgia Tech gave up a bunch of turnovers in that game, and Pitt just couldn't capitalize. But NC State wasn't really that close. There were losses throughout that season where you didn't feel like, boy, this team's close. This team, just one break one way or the other, and their record looks completely different. The outcome of some of these games looks completely different. So, it's not always the case. That's not always the case with football games when you lose them. But I think it has been this year with these 3 games. I think it has been the case that this team is just one break here, one break there away from, instead of being 3-3, being 4-2, 5-1, 6-0. 3-game losing streak being, 2-1 over the last 3 games. 1-2, 3-0 over the last 3 games. They're that close. Just need a break to go their way. Need a break here. Ball to bounce this way. Guy just cuts it back in. Guy doesn't miss an extra point. Guy catches a 2-point conversion. All these different little things, right? And I know there are some people out there who are probably listening to this podcast or they're watching this live stream. I'm trying not to look at the comments just yet. We're going to get to all the comments and the questions and the reactions. But I wanted to sort of have tunnel vision on this thought before I get into your comments. And I can imagine that there are people out there probably reacting in the comment section, probably listening to this podcast saying, I'm tired of being close. I don't want to be one break away from a different outcome. I'm tired of this team getting close and not being able to finish and not being able to capitalize on opportunities and all of that kind of thing. And maybe even getting annoyed that I'm talking in these terms about how close this team is, about how they could break through. I think they could go on a bit of a streak if some of these things break their way, one way or the other, over the next 2 months. I can understand if you don't want to hear that kind of talk because I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Those kinds of things, talking about how a team is really close, boy, they just need some breaks. It's pretty encouraging how close they are. That's what you say in a head coach's first year. His second year, as he's building a program up, you're looking for signs of encouragement, reasons for optimism, reasons to believe that things are headed in a certain direction. In those early years, when he hasn't recruited all of his guys, when he hasn't fully gotten his system implemented, he hasn't gotten the kind of athletes he wants to run his offense or his defense. They're not there yet, but they're getting there. Look how close they are. These guys are fighting, man. They just get one break their way, and these guys, it could really make an impact. That's the kind of thing you say, and we probably did say it in 2015. And 2016 was a unique year, but 2015, I think we probably could look back. You look at the Iowa game. They needed a kid to make a 60-yard field goal to lose that game, and Iowa ends up in the top 15 by the end of the season. Or Notre Dame or Miami or North Carolina. Boy, they're so close. And this is the first year. He doesn't even have his guys. Wait till he gets his guys. Well, he's got his guys. Pat Narduzzi has his players. Pat Narduzzi is not in his first year as Pitt's head coach. Pat Narduzzi is not in his second year as Pitt's head coach. And I'm going to drag this out for emphasis. He is not in his third year as Pitt head coach. He is not in his fourth year as Pitt head coach. I'll have a drink. Pat Narduzzi is not in his fifth year as Pitt head coach. He's in year 6. And in year 6, just being one bounce of the ball away, not quite good enough. It's true. It's true that this team is just a few lucky bounces away from things going completely different. You know what I mean? From having a different outcome in the last 3 games. From having a far more positive outcome. It's true. That's not faulty logic. But it's also true that in year 6, with a team entirely comprised of players you have recruited and a bunch of veteran guys all over the place, these things should not be happening. You should not be in a 3-game losing streak against NC State, Boston College, and Miami because the ball didn't bounce your way a couple times. And we talked last week about how you keep playing these close games, then you leave yourself vulnerable to something like a missed extra point or a drop 2-point conversion. These are the kinds of things that can sink you. A bad, ill-timed turnover or something like that, or a poor penalty or a bad call or just some weird fluky luck can sink you if you keep playing games that close. We talked about that. Well, I'm gonna amend that this week. I'm gonna change that this week and say that in year 6, you should not be putting yourself in that position anymore. In year 6, you should not be sitting back and saying, "Oh, we're so close on this." And I don't think Pat Narduzzi is saying that. I haven't heard him saying that. I've had different conversations with different people that say, those games were winnable because they were. You will not convince me that Pitt could not beat NC State, or Pitt could not beat Boston College, or Pitt could not beat Miami. And you could not convince me that Pitt would need some Herculean luck, or not Herculean luck, a Herculean performance to beat NC State, or Boston College, or Miami, like they did against Clemson. You could not convince me that they would need some supernatural luck to beat those 3 teams. They are good enough to beat those teams, but they failed to do so. And some of that is on the talent. I just said they're good enough to beat those teams. I think overall, talent-wise, they are good enough to beat those teams. Some of that is on individual players and the struggles that they had and how they held back what Pitt was trying to do on offense or defense. And some of that is on the coaches. Ultimately, the accountability all falls on the coaches. That's the way this works. College football, pro football, high school football, midget leagues. At a certain point, it comes back to you. The buck literally does stop with the head coach. And at a certain point, keep pushing back. And there's only one guy left in the room. And that accountability, that falls on Pat Narduzzi for the fact that his team has blown these 3 games. And we've talked about recurring themes and familiar traits and the same old story, and the fact that this team has managed to lose games the same way that last year's team managed to lose games, and how that's troubling. The fact that they've, seemingly picked up the bad habits of last season, that they haven't been improved, and that they haven't gotten better. They haven't learned from those mistakes and built on those mistakes and shown improvement in any of those really key areas, namely blocking in the running game as well as red zone offense. It's disturbing that this defense continues to have the kind of busts that it has. But I go back and forth on that one. Yeah, I'll say this. I go back and forth on that one. And I'll tell you why. They had some bad busts in the Miami game. 3 out of the 4 touchdowns were total busts in coverage. And you say, how could that happen? How could they be so ill-prepared to make those mistakes? And it's particularly troubling because it's the same mistakes we've seen over the past 5 years, 6 years with players in this defensive scheme. I guess the thing I would say is this. Mistakes do happen. Saw a couple of weeks ago, Travis Fulgham, look what he did to the Steelers. How does that happen? You see coverage busts all the time in the NFL. Guys make mistakes. There are responsibilities. They need to know what their responsibilities are. Somebody takes a wrong step. Somebody goes the wrong direction. Somebody sees the wrong thing. Somebody doesn't see the thing they're supposed to see, and all of a sudden the guy is wide open. I don't mean to excuse it, but I'm going to say right off the top, I don't have a lot of issues with this defense right now. And I know they've given up, 30, 31, 31, in consecutive weeks. I don't have a lot of issues with this defense. I think this defense makes an impact. 2 big interceptions this past week. They had a fumble the week before. They're still getting after the quarterback. This defensive line is making an impact. I think these linebackers look really good. I think there are some issues in the secondary, where they're held back by injuries to some extent, with Damari Mathis not playing, and a little bit of a lack of depth, which we talked about before the season, that there were some holes in the secondary and holes in the depth that were probably going to take a year to fill, that you were going to need some young guys to kind of grow up this year and be ready to go next year. But overall, I don't have a lot of issues with this defense. I don't have a lot of issues with the structure of it. There are, times when I wish they had more than one guy covering a guy. There are times when I wish they weren't so keyed up to stop the run that they gave up some of those easy plays up the middle, and on the seams and the tight end and all that stuff. But the issue is the offense. The issue is the failure to generate an effective, productive offense that is consistent in its effort, consistent in its execution, and consistent in its production. And that's the biggest problem right now. And if this ship keeps going the direction it's going to be because of the offense. And this is like the 4th offensive coordinator now. You fired a guy, and 2 years later, it hasn't gotten any better. And again, ultimately, that accountability comes back to the head coach. And some people have talked about Heather Lyke, Pitt's director of athletics. She should force some changes. Force Pat Narduzzi to fire Mark Whipple. Force him to fire Dave Borbley. Force him to fire the entire offensive staff except for Chris Beatty, because he's such a good recruiter. I mean, those things may happen, and they might happen this year. They may happen across college athletics. I think it's a recipe for trouble. I think if you're an athletic director, you hire a coach, and I understand that Heather Lyke didn't hire Pat Narduzzi, but I mean, if you're an athletic director, you have a coach, you commit to that coach, and you let that head coach build his staff the way he sees fit, with the understanding that he is accountable and responsible for what that staff does and how that staff performs. And it trickles down. The coaches, the assistant coaches, are responsible for how their position groups perform. If Pitt's wide receivers can't catch the ball, if Pitt's offensive lineman can't block, the offensive line coach gets fired. If Pitt's wide receivers can't catch the ball, Pitt's wide receivers coach gets fired. You can't fire the players. You can't fire the receivers, the offensive linemen, or whoever. You fire the assistant coach, because their job, they're accountable for how the players perform. The head coach is accountable for how the assistant coaches perform. And if ultimately the head coach finds the assistant coaches to not be performing up to a certain level, then he makes those changes that need to be made. If after changes have been made and it's a few years down the road, the director of athletics or the athletic director looks at it and says, still not working. They don't say, go fire your offensive coordinator because I know better about how to build a college football staff than you do. They say, you need to figure this out. Because if you don't, it's on you. That's how I think it works in 90% of the cases. Not, you need to go fire Mark Whipple. It's, you need to figure out a way to fix this. And if you believe in Mark Whipple, that's fine. If you believed in Sean Watson, that's fine. You are hitching your wagon to him. You are putting your situation, your position, your job on the line for him. If that's who you believe can get it done, I hope you're right. For your sake. I think that's how it works in most situations. And that's why the head coach has to make the decision of, is this going to get fixed? Realistically, is this going to fix? Am I willing to stake my job on this guy figuring it out when he hasn't figured it out for the last 2 years? Pat Narduzzi wasn't willing to stake his job on Sean Watson. He made that change. We'll find out after this season if he's willing to stake his job on Mark Whipple. 6 years in, I mean, I'm not going to say the chickens are coming home to roost, but you're sitting at 3-3 with a 3-game losing streak, losing games like you've lost before. And, we've talked about the unlikeliness or unlikelihood of a head coach getting fired in this particular year because of all the unique circumstances surrounding 2020. But you're definitely not helping yourself with these kinds of games. I think that's very clear. And Pat Narduzzi's going to have decisions to make after the season. If things don't make a drastic turnaround over the course of the next 5 games, Pat Narduzzi's going to have some real decisions to make. And even if they do make a turnaround, I'm not sure that he's going to be able to get away without making some of those calls, because it's a bad situation right now, and it's hurting the program. It's holding the program back, and I don't think there's any denying that. All right, let's get into some of the comments here. See what we got. We got a Royce Beacom showing up. We appreciate that. RJCman38. Like I said, if you want to get your comments in here during the live stream, you want to get your question answered, get your comment read and some reactions to it, you could be a super chatter right down there below the say something area. You can see that there's an emoji and a little box with a $sign on it. You can click that and support the podcast and get your comment. We will get to your comments. I can guarantee that. So you can definitely get in the conversation. I know sometimes I miss people's comments, and I hate to do that. I apologize. Sometimes we just run out of time, and so that is that's a way to make sure that what you say gets seen. Let's see. Somebody just chimed in here. Tom Slivka just contributed to the podcast. We appreciate it, man. Thank you so much, Tom. Glad to have you checking us out here today. All right, let's get into a few of the comments. S-Max started us off, said, I'm worried about the 2021 potential decommits, not the local commitments, but the out-of-towners like Malik Newton and Khalil Anderson. I hope they haven't actually hope they haven't been following Pitt this season. Well, I mean, you mentioned Malik Newton and Khalil Anderson. Newton's a running back and Anderson's a cornerback. If you want to, I think you could sell those guys on the opportunity that is at Pitt, right? I think you could tell them, look, we don't have a number 1 running back. We don't have a number 1 corner. We've got Marquez Williams coming back and a few younger guys, but there are going to be opportunities for you to play. I think we overestimate sometimes the impact that the current season can have on recruits. I've covered Pitt going through 5-7 seasons and going through 10-3 seasons, and I don't know if there have been many times. I'm sure there have been a few here and there, but there haven't been a lot of times where I've really seen a direct impact where, oh man, Pitt just lost to Youngstown State, and there were I don't remember any decommitments when Pitt lost to Youngstown State, I guess I would say. And when they went out the next week and they got blown out at Cincinnati, I don't remember many decommitments that year. So, I don't think there's as much of a correlation there as sometimes people would believe. But it's definitely, I mean, the coaches have to make sure they're reassuring these guys about the future of the program and where they're leading the program and where the the direction of the program. I think that's part of recruiting. Colin Towell says, what are the chances we see the same type of game for the fourth straight week? Drops, play calling, penalties, etc. Something's got to change, right? Yeah, I mean, like, are pitch receivers all of a sudden going to have a great game catching the ball? It's possible, but I mean, they haven't lately. You know what I mean? And it's been an ongoing theme. Penalties have been a problem for the last year and a half. Drop passes have been a problem for the last year and a half. The run game has been a problem for the last year and a half. And it's to the point where if they go out and have a game, if they go out and rush for 250 yards against Notre Dame this week or something like that, I don't think anyone's going to believe that, wow, that's sustainable. Because you've got 19 games of evidence that it's not sustainable, where they won. I don't even know. Did they have a 200-yard game in that stretch of 19 games since Mark Whipple came to Pitt? I don't. If they go out and have a game with no penalties at all, they say, boy, that's a good thing. Let's see if they need to build on it. But I don't think it's something you're going to really count on happening because that hasn't been the trend for the last 19 games. That hasn't been who they are, and so they've, they are who they are. What they need to do is just get a little more consistent, and maybe they can have some luck. Colin's first question, though, what are the chances we see the same type of game for the fourth straight week? This is something I've been thinking about. I've always thought it about sports, particularly football, where it's one game a week. I mean, baseball, you can kind of put a bad game in your memory pretty quick because you're going to go out and play the next night, or even hockey, you're going to go out and play in the next couple days. Football, you go a whole week. And so you spend a whole week thinking about all the bad things your team did in a loss, right? And then they go out the next week and they lose again. And then you spend the whole next week thinking about the last two losses and how bad those games were. And then when they go out and lose a third game in a row, now you're thinking about 3 losses and all those bad things. And you really can't imagine the team doing anything well at all. And this is what happens in football, I think, for fans and media, that when you watch a team lose multiple games in a row, all you can think about is those things they did poorly. And it's hard to really imagine them doing anything well. They will win more games this season, plural. They will win more games this season. At some point, they're going to play well enough to beat a team. It's just funny because it feels hard to imagine that when you're sitting, in a 3-game losing streak. Because all I can see is the same thing as you, Colin, is all you can see is drop passes, penalties, questionable play calls, questionable in-game decisions, busted coverage on defense. These are the things I see too. It's hard for me to sit back, and I've tried to do it, say, man, Jordan Addison killed it on Saturday. He had a great game. Joey Yellen looked pretty promising. As a fill-in for Kenny Pickett, I think it did a pretty good job. That defensive line was getting after it with Miami last week. And those linebackers are really coming around. There's some youth and impressive young guys coming up in that group of linebackers, and they're playing really well. Marquez Williams' interception was an outstanding play. Paris Ford is making some freak plays in the last 2 games. He broke up a touchdown at Boston College. He had an interception where he was just barely out of bounds, and it was an incredibly athletic play. I don't know if there are many guys on Pitt's team who could make that play. Maybe Jordan Addison, and that might be it. Daniel Marega caught a touchdown. First time a Pitt tight end has caught a touchdown since the Duke game last year. And just the third time a Pitt tight end has caught a touchdown in the last 4 seasons. There are all these positive. That one got couched in a negative. But there are all these positives I could point to and look at and talk about. But it's so hard to not think about drop passes, penalties, red zone issues, inability to run the ball, defensive coverage busts. It's hard not to dwell on those things when we've seen so many of them. We see so much of that stuff, and it has cost Pitt 3 wins this season. You know what I mean? And it's led them into a 3-game losing streak. It's hard to think about what they're going to need to do to get back in the win column and how they're going to break the losing streak. It's hard to imagine them winning again, but they will. They might win this weekend. They'll win more games this year. Brock Madonic, always like to hear from Brock here on the live stream, says, hashtag free Todd Sibley. He was an Under Armour All-American for a reason. He definitely can be the lead back. I didn't know what Todd Sibley could do for Pitt. I honestly didn't. In the base defense, or in the base offense, in the regular offense, not the Wildcat. We had seen him in the Wildcat, but it wasn't really sure what he could do in the regular offense. Well, he got the start and made some runs, had some good runs. Had 23 yards on his first 4 carries. But the problem was, of course, he only got 4 carries, and I don't understand it. I mean, I'm still not sold on Todd Sibley as a lead back, but hell, you might as well give him some more opportunities. It's not like Vincent Davis has grabbed that job. It's not like A.J. Davis has grabbed that job. Izzy Abanikanda apparently got hurt and didn't even make the trip to Miami. Daniel Carter was there but didn't get a single handoff. He played a couple of snaps but didn't get any carries or any rushing attempts. You might as well see what you've got in Todd Sibley. Put him on the field. Put him out there. Run the ball with him for a couple series and see if he can do it. I mean, you really coaches don't like to just, well, let's see what happens. They build a wealth of information, a base of knowledge about their team over the course of training camp and spring camp and the workouts and stuff, and then in the week leading up to the game. They build this base of knowledge about their team, and they think they know what these guys are, what this guy can do, what that guy can do. And if they form certain impressions based on practice, it's hard for them to then go into the game and say, well, let's see what this guy can do. He didn't really do much for us in practice, but let's see what this guy can do. That's not really how coaches think. They're going to go with what they saw in practice. Now, maybe Todd Sibley's not a great practice player. I don't know if that's the case. I'm not saying that's the case. I don't know if it's the case. But, I mean, he produced in the game. So you might as well give him a few more handoffs. Vincent Davis had 9 carries for a net 0 yards. A.J. Davis has never really done anything all that outstanding in his career at Pitt. Daniel Carter looks intriguing. Izzy Abanikanda looks really intriguing. I think Abanikanda has the highest ceiling out of any of these guys, but he's hurt, so you can't play him. Daniel Carter, I don't know if he's still hurt or what it is, but you're obviously not playing him. You might as well give Todd Sibley a full run and see what he can do. At least let him take all the handoffs in a quarter and don't limit it to a game where he's just got 4 carries. You might as well give him a go. I don't know if it's going to turn into anything, but you might as well try. Let's see, Jason Martell says, I haven't seen it mentioned much, but really nice game from DeAndre Jules this past Saturday. Yeah, that's, like I'm talking about Jason with some of the positive things. DeAndre Jules gotten into the game the last 2 weeks, played well at Miami, made the most of his limited snaps. Dayon Hayes got a handful of snaps down at Miami. Made the most of it, made an impact. We talk about, and I don't know if I'll talk about it this week or not. I'll probably save it, either for next week, maybe the off week, be a good time to talk about it. But we were talking about it on the message boards about comparing the position groups this year versus next year. Which units, which position groups are going to improve, which ones are going to take a step back. How is that going to work out? Year-to-year comparison. Which ones are going to be better, which are going to be worse. And I think the defensive line is one that, or the defensive end specifically, when you look at a guy like Dayon Hayes and some of the other younger ends on the team, I think they're going to take a step back because they don't have Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver next year. It's inevitable that you're going to take a step back, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad position group. They're playing at a really high level right now. Jones and Weaver are doing a really good job. And playing, like I say, at a really high level. But once you lose those guys, you're still going to have John Morgan, Habakkuk Baldonado. You're going to have Dayon Hayes. Desmond Alexander maybe comes back. You're going to have some really good defensive ends on this team. They may not be at the level of a Jones and a Weaver, but they're going to be really good. And I think, Dayon Hayes shows that promise. I think DeAndre Jules as a young defensive tackle shows that promise. I mean, those are some of those things I think you can be encouraged about. But like I was saying, it's hard to be encouraged when you're in a 3-game losing streak. Let's see. Matt Sable says, I don't think Ian Book can throw. Pitt has a chance to stop them, but Notre Dame is a very good line. Yeah, this is really going to be a strength versus strength thing. I think Pitt is number 1 or number 2 in the nation in rushing defense. in yards per game allowed. Notre Dame, I think, is number 7 in the nation in rushing offense in yards per game gained. Notre Dame's strength is running the ball. Their offensive line is very veteran. Notre Dame always seems to have a very veteran offensive line, a bunch of guys who have played a lot of games. They have a lot of experience, and that's certainly the case this year. And Notre Dame likes to run the ball, and they run it really well. And Pitt likes to stop the ball, as we know, and they do a very good job at stopping the run. That's going to be a battle of strength versus strength. Pitt, I thought, did a good job getting after Ian Book 2 years ago when they played Notre Dame out in South Bend. I think they'll try and do that again, but I mean, it's going to be all about stopping the run. Now, I mean, you say that and go into a game expecting to solely have to stop the run, and that's when a team comes out and hits you with a bunch of play action passes and things like that. So you got to keep an eye on Notre Dame in that regard and keep an eye on Ian Book in that regard. But, overall, the Irish are going to look to try and establish the run, and Pitt loves to shut that down, and they've done a good job of it this year. That's going to be the real battle to watch in this game. See how Pitt's defensive line and linebackers match up with the offensive line of Notre Dame. It's not going to be an easy matchup, but it's going to it's going to be a challenge. Lauren Seekley? Sorry, man. I apologize for mispronouncing your name. How much does Pitt win by on Saturday? It's a great game. No idea. Or it's a great question. I have no idea. It's they can win. They can win this game. Notre Dame beat Louisville 12-7? If Notre Dame beat Louisville 12-7, Pitt can beat Notre Dame. It's just going to be a matter of stopping the run and making a few less mistakes on offense. That's what it comes down to. Few less mistakes on offense. Let's see here. Lucky Cheaper says all 3 phases have been extremely disappointing, but I feel like the players are tired of their constant mistakes and pull it all together for the upset this week. Pitt 23-20. From your mouth to God's ears, right? I think it's entirely possible. I mean, they need to focus in more. They need to be more disciplined on the field. It's all the things we've talked about time and time again. Tom Slivka, he chipped in for the super chat, and we appreciate that. Tom says this program will always be what it is until big money athletic alums care about this program and their legacy. Yeah, I mean, it's Pitt's level of donations is probably never going to be what it is at certain schools in this country. Pitt is probably always going to be in the bottom half of the Power 5 in donations. I don't know if the fan base is ever going to be strong enough to contribute at that level. That doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be riding a 3-game losing streak in year 6 of a head coach's tenure with a veteran team. I think all those things can sort of be true. To get to a certain level of success and to sustain that level of success, you need to have a certain level of commitment from your fan base. And Pitt doesn't have that, and they probably never will have that. And if they don't, it's going to be hard to sustain at that level because ultimately you got to have money. You know what I mean? You got to have money to win at a high level. And that's what those programs have. But, Pitt doesn't have that, and they've committed resources. There's no question about it. I think they've committed money to the football program with facilities upgrades, and they've committed the money to the coaching staff. You can't talk about Pitt being cheap anymore because I don't think they are. I think I think they ponied up for Jeff Capel, and they've put money into facilities renovations at the Peterson Events Center. They're obviously committing a lot of money to the Victory Heights project, and they've committed a lot of money to the football program. But you also need the donor side of it. You need that strong base of fan support, and Pitt doesn't have that. And you can argue chicken and egg. You can argue, whether or not it's a result of the program's lack of success over the years. That's why there isn't a stronger fan support from the fan base. And then you can also argue the other way around, that if the support from the fan base was stronger, then maybe there'd be more success over the years. Like I say, it's chicken and egg. But it's just a simple reality of who Pitt is and where they are. RJC Man 38, he jumped in on the super chat. You can do that too, and we appreciate it. We'll definitely get to your comments if you do. He says the reality is Pitt's 3 losses this season were preventable. If Pitt gets to 6-5, which is a miracle at this point, would it be wrong to be more mad than I am right now? If I understand your question, man, I mean, the disappointment and missed opportunity of the last 3 games is never going to go away. If Pitt continues to struggle and only wins 2 more games the rest of the season and they go 5-6, Boston College and NC State and to a lesser extent Miami will be games you point out and you say those were ones they let get away. That it didn't have to be 5-6, it could have been 7-4, but they let those games get away. Conversely, if Pitt turns it around, and they're 3-3 right now, if they somehow go like 4-1 over the final 5 games or something, if they go something crazy like that and finish 7-4, you're still going to look back and say NC State and Boston College were 2 that they let get away, and 7-4 could have been 9-3. And I know it's extreme to say that this team would go 4-1 down the stretch, but just to go to sort of a hyperbole example, even winning at that level over the final 5 games is not going to erase the disappointment of losing those, the NC State and Boston College games, and to a certain extent Miami as well. Because whatever Pitt achieves, they could have been 2 wins better if they'd gotten their stuff together against NC State and Boston College, and that's going to they're not going to be able to shed that. There isn't really any level they could reach. Any level of success they could reach this season that I think will overshadow the missed opportunities that were the NC State and Boston College games. You have to own it. You lost those games. You wear it for the rest of the season. Let's scroll down here. See some other comments here. Dale Gribble says, because of the talent on this team and a top 5 defense, if we don't get past 4 or 5 wins, this is the worst Pitt team in the last 20 to 30 years. Well, I don't know if it's the worst Pitt team, but if they only win 2 more games and they go 5-6, I think you can make a good case it's the biggest disappointment of the last, goodness. What would you even compare it to? 2003 had a lot of expectations. That team ended up only winning 8 games. That was pretty disappointing. 2010, I think there were a lot of expectations, maybe misplaced, but they were based largely on the strength of the previous season. And they go out and win 8 games. That was pretty disappointing. This team, I think the expectations were as high as they've been in quite some time. And I'll admit to I bought into them as well. And I thought it was for good reason. I could lay out the case of why this team should be a good team, a successful team this year, and maybe succeed at a level that we hadn't seen in a while around here. And I don't think I was stretching the limits of reason. I always use that phrase. I wasn't stretching the limits of reason to say that this defense should be very good. This offense has a lot of veteran players coming back who should make some improvement over last season, and that should lead this team to a lot of success. I wasn't stretching the limits of reason in saying that. And the fact that they've lost these games, particularly NC State and Boston College, but also to some extent Miami, this team already is a considerable disappointment. I don't know if it's the best team since or the worst team since or anything like that, Dale, but in terms of being a disappointment, yeah, this team is there already. They are a disappointment for losing those games. And kind of like I just said to RJC Man 38's question, you have to own that. You have to wear that for the rest of the season and beyond. You're not going to get away from that because you can't undo those losses. They're on your record. They're on your permanent record. Unless NC State and Boston College end up vacating the season or something, which I don't think is going to happen. Let's see. Royce Beacom points out that Pitt continues to pursue different types of penalties not regularly seen: a fair catch interference, chop block, head slap, illegal procedure on the punt receiving team, versed on rules of the game by the coaches. Yeah, it is weird. And look, we've seen Pitt get called for having 2 guys with the same number on the field back in 2011. We've seen Pitt get called for disconcerting signals. I think that was 2009. Dan Mason was the middle linebacker when Pitt went down to NC State, and he was yelling things out, I think trying to throw off the cadence. We've seen some weird penalties, over the years. And certainly, the chop block, I can't remember the last time I saw Pitt get called for a chop block penalty. The kick catch interference, that's just a dumb mistake. 2 weeks ago? No, was it? Oh yeah, it was this week. It was this week with the two illegal formation penalties on special teams defensive units, which was a pretty special one. I guess that's a new rule about where you can line up, but that's a pretty special one to come out to, I gotta say. That's I haven't seen that one before, but that was pretty. You just wonder, where do these things come from? You know what I mean? Like how does this team manage to manufacture these things sort of week after week and find new ways to kind of shoot themselves in the foot? But let's see here. Scroll down and see some of the other comments. Michael McAlone, our good friend Mac, good to hear from you, buddy, says this week seems similar to Clemson week 2016 and Miami home win in 2017. Pitt's coming off a few frustrating weeks, and the Irish look flat at home versus Louisville. God willing, limit the unforced errors. Yeah, I can't really compare it to that. You know, I mean, Clemson 2016, they were coming off a blowout loss at Miami. I mean, they looked just awful. That's kind of the forgotten game in 2016. They were doing well, you know, they're humming along through the season, and they go down to Miami and just get their doors blown off. Looked like they didn't even belong on the same field. I think Quadri Henderson, returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown, if I recall, and then. Or maybe not it was like the first kickoff that Pitt received. I forget if Miami got the ball first and scored a touchdown or not. But Quadri Henderson returned a kickoff for a touchdown. You thought, oh, okay, they're going to be in business. And they were terrible. The offense couldn't do anything. They couldn't stop Brad Kaya and those guys. I mean, it was a total mess. And that really led people to believe they had no chance against Clemson. Miami in 2017, I don't even know if people were paying close enough attention to talk about whether or not they gave Pitt a chance against Miami. They were coming off that Virginia Tech loss. It was pretty ugly at that point. I think 4-8 was a real possibility. Everybody was staring that down and considering it as a real option, and not really thinking that Pitt had much of a chance. Although we in retrospect, we could have seen that coming. Pitt's defense was playing relatively well at that point in the season, and Miami's offense was pretty bad. You know, even before they played Pitt, they couldn't convert a third down to save their lives. It was that one, in retrospect, was more likely than the Clemson game in 2016 or the 13-9 game in 2007. That one was probably a little more likely. This game, I don't feel like people were writing off Pitt's chances. I think everyone has a good understanding of what Pitt needs to do to lose games, or how Pitt is able to lose games. And I think they know that, Pitt tends to play Notre Dame pretty tough. And so, the game very well could go Pitt's way. Of course, a lot of people said that Pitt will go out and beat Notre Dame, and then they'll have their off week, and everybody will feel great for 2 weeks, and then they'll go lose to Florida State. So, I think people are considering this as a very real possibility for a win. Whether or not it actually happens, I mean, it depends on whether Pitt can clean things up. And I don't know. Let's see here. I don't know if they can do it. I don't know if they can clean it up because they haven't done it for the last, year and a half. 19 games, really. Let's see here. Scrolling down. Joe Lanzal says, I apologize if I mispronounced your last name there, Joe, but he says, at what point do the players start to give up? I don't think the players are going to give up. Yeah, I mean, I think these guys have too much self-respect. I think that whatever you want to say and whatever, you might hear, I think they have a lot of respect for the coaches. I think they have respect for themselves. They're not going to give up. I think they want to go out and play. They want to go out and fight. They want to go out and win. They want to win some pride back. I guarantee you, no matter how bad you feel about the NC State game, or how bad you felt about the Boston College game, or how bad you feel right now after the Miami game, the players feel worse and the coaches feel worse. And they felt worse when it ended, and they certainly feel worse in the aftermath of those games. I mean, and I don't think they're going to give up. I would be shocked if they did, because I don't get that sense from these players. I don't get that sense from these players about their pride in themselves. I don't get that sense from these players about their relationship with the coaches, their respect from for the coaches. I don't see anybody giving up. That said, it could wear you down. I mean, I think it could very much wear you down if you keep having games like this. Although, maybe you keep your head up a little bit because you're close. Like I talked about at the very beginning about how close they actually are to in these games. You know what I mean? How close they are to getting these wins. You can't feel like it's not like you're getting blown out. I don't think Pitt should step on the field with anybody, any opponent this season, other than maybe Clemson, and feel like they're not, close enough to equal that they can, that they have a chance to win. And I mean, really, they shouldn't step on the field with Clemson and feel like they don't have a chance to win. But I mean, there isn't an opponent that should intimidate Pitt. I think talent-wise, these guys should feel like they can play with anybody that's on their schedule, and I think they're right about that. It's just a matter of cleaning up their mistakes and just being a little crisper, executing just a little bit better. And I think the results can turn around. Like I say, I think they'll win a couple more. I shouldn't say a couple more games. They'll win more games, plural. How many depends on how much they're able to turn it around. All right. Thanks again to everybody who jumped in on the super chat. We really appreciate that. We're going to keep that opportunity out there as over the ensuing podcast. Like I say, we're going to come back on Saturday night, tentatively between 9 and 9:30. We'll do a post-game chat about this, about the Pitt Notre Dame game, what I saw, what you saw, and we can all get together and talk about it. We'll do a live stream just like this and then release it as a podcast. If you're listening to the podcast, you want to get in on the conversation. I mean, like you heard us talking with all these guys, Colin and RGC Man and, Tom and Royce and, Roman. I don't know if Roman was in there tonight, but, we get a regular crowd in here. You want to come in the conversation, have a little chat on a Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m., youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. This is a place you can go. And then, like I say, on at that same website, that same address on Saturday night, between 9 and 9:30, I'll set a more specific time as we get closer. We are going to talk about the Pitt Notre Dame game live right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Of course, the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. That's where everything happens all day, every day. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and, of course, message boards where if you like Pitt conversation and Pitt interaction and Pitt discussion, it's happening on the Panther-Lair.com message boards all day, every day. So you can definitely go there and check that out, Panther-Lair.com, if you want to have some Pitt conversation. Don't forget, Saturday morning, 8 a.m., we will have the Panthers Insider Show. It's the start of the pregame coverage on 93.7 The Fan, really to get you ready for Pitt Notre Dame. So another hour of Pitt sports talk that you can dig into, 8 a.m., 93.7 The Fan. And then Pitt Notre Dame, 3:30 p.m. kickoff at Heinz Field on Saturday. Follow along either at the game, or if you're not at the game, you're watching at home, follow along on Panther-Lair.com. And like I say, 8 to 8:30, between 9 and 9:30, we'll fire up the live stream and talk about the game on Saturday night. So thanks to everybody for tuning in on the live stream. We really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who's in the chat. We appreciate that. Super chatters, big shout out to you guys. And thanks to everyone who listened to the podcast through the week. Go to the website, Panther-Lair.com. Have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the game on Saturday. We'll talk to you Saturday night.